There are a lot of evil people in this world. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not one of them. Pam Bondi, our Attorney General, Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, the Director of Homeland Security, our Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Donald Trump, they are evil, hateful, hurtful, and dangerous. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not. At the age of 16, Kilmar Abrego Garcia fled El Salvador, escaping gangs who were trying to recruit him. He moved to Maryland so he could live with his older brother. 5 years later, he and his girlfriend, Jennifer, a United States citizen, moved in together, and after she became pregnant with his child, they started a family. In 2019, an immigration judge granted Garcia temporary protected legal status after Garcia, still not a citizen, was arrested by a dirty Maryland cop who falsely accused Garcia of being a member of MS-13 based on nothing but hearsay and because, said the dirty cop, Garcia was wearing a hoodie and a Chicago Bulls cap, which, according to this dirty cop, that signified Garcia was a gang banger. So the dirty cop turned Garcia over to ICE. He was a dirty cop. He ended up getting thrown off the force. So that was back in March of 2019. And a month later, Garcia, held in ICE detention, went before an immigration judge who, because of the processing backlog for immigrants, that judge agreed with ICE that Garcia should be detained, denied bond until his next hearing, which was scheduled for October of 2019. So while waiting for his next hearing, Garcia held inside that ICE detention center. His first child was born 2 months after Garcia married Jennifer, who was a U.S. citizen and the mother of his baby. They married while he was being detained. In October of 2019, having been in ICE custody since March of that year, Garcia finally went before an immigration judge who determined Garcia is not, in fact, a gangbanger and did, in fact, come to the United States to escape MS-13. And the judge said the cop who arrested him, as well as the witnesses who convinced the cop that Garcia was MS-13, the judge said none of them could be trusted. So, 2019, the judge released Garcia from ICE detention and granted him temporary protected legal status, which means ICE is forbidden from deporting Garcia back to El Salvador because it wouldn't be safe for him. At that point, near the end of 2019, there was no longer any question as to whether Garcia was in our country legally. He was here legally before he went before the judge, because being in this country without documentation is a civil, not a criminal violation. Look it up. Being undocumented is not a crime. That's the law. Why? Because so many American industries, from big ag to healthcare, rely on immigrant labor, seasonal employees who traditionally come and go depending on the work that's available. There has always been a strategic legal ambiguity in our immigration law, so low-wage workers wouldn't get locked up for being here without documents. Again, it's a civil violation, meaning if you're caught in this country without the proper paperwork, you can only be fined. The person who hired you can only be fined. And it all depends on the political mood of our country. That's it, as to what they do with you, whether they fine you or begin to deport you. Before our immigration law came under attack by Donald Trump, our immigration law was something that Elon Musk and the rest of the fascists from Silicon Valley are strong believers in. And that is, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is permission. Elon Musk was here on a student visa, but he never went to school. He just asked for forgiveness. He didn't have permission. Self-driving cars were illegal in San Francisco, but that didn't stop Silicon Valley from using San Francisco as a proving ground for self-driving cars because it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is permission. Our country was built by migrants who got into the country somehow and then were forgiven. They didn't have permission necessarily to come here, but once they were here, they were given permission to stay. Donald Trump never got permission to build in New York City. He just started and then would go before judges and ask for forgiveness. So Garcia was released from ICE detention at the end of 2019 with not just temporary protected legal status, but also a work permit. A work permit. And that means he was doubly documented. Now, he's not a citizen. He's married to one. His children are citizens. And he's in our system. He's an open book. He's not hiding in the shadows. He's obeying our laws. And he has all the necessary documentation to be and work here in the United States. He even got a driver's license. In 2021, Garcia's wife, claiming physical abuse, began the process of requesting a civil, not a criminal, a civil restraining order against her husband, Garcia, in which, had she followed through, a judge would have ordered Garcia not to threaten, intimidate, or assault her. She decided against it. There was no restraining order. She began to file one, but dropped it after the couple went into counseling and she said, learn to communicate better. He was 26 when that happened. Keep in mind, had there been any evidence of physical violence, it would have been out of his wife's hands. Maryland police would have been obligated to arrest Garcia, but he was never arrested because there wasn't any reasonable suspicion of physical violence. That didn't stop Donald Trump on Monday from once again dehumanizing Garcia, calling him an animal who repeatedly brutalized his wife. That is a lie coming from the man who was ordered last year to pay E. Jean Carroll more than $80 million after a jury ruled he had raped her in what the judge called common law parlance. In 2022, Garcia was pulled over for speeding by a Tennessee patrol officer who clocked him driving 75 miles per hour on I-40. That's 10 miles over the limit. The patrol officer noted Garcia was driving with an expired Maryland license, told him to fix it, and then sent him on his way. There was no arrest. But because the Chevrolet Suburban that Garcia was driving had 8 to 10 passengers in it, none of whom appeared to speak English except Garcia, the officer, before sending Garcia on his way, brought in a police dog to sniff for drugs or weapons. The dog found nothing. Garcia explained to the patrol officer, and there's body cam footage that you can see of this. Garcia explained he was transporting construction workers from a job in St. Louis, bringing them home to Maryland. And he said they don't speak English. So before Garcia was allowed to drive off after this traffic stop, before he was free to go, having committed no offense other than driving 10 miles on the freeway over the speed limit with an expired driver's license, that officer made a call to the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security to run a check on Garcia because the patrol officer was concerned that Garcia might be engaging in human smuggling since his passengers didn't speak English. The patrol officer was told by either the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security that Garcia wasn't wanted for human smuggling, that he had no criminal record, and there was no need to detain him, so Garcia was free to drive back to Maryland. The patrol officer sent him on his way because no crime, no suspicion of a crime, no arrest, no charges of human smuggling, no drugs, no gun. It is not a crime to drive 8 or 10 immigrants who don't speak English to and from a construction site. It is not a crime to transport people who don't speak English to a construction site. If it were, Trump Tower would have never been finished. Now, did those immigrants in Garcia's back seat have work permits? Were they in the system? Were they living in the shadows? I have no idea. But it's not a crime to live in the shadows in this country. It's not a crime to work in America without a work permit or without a visa. It's not a crime to be undocumented. It's not a crime to be undocumented and working in this country. It is only a civil misdemeanor that could, depending on the mood of the country or the arresting officer, result in, at worst, a fine or a deportation proceeding. These are not criminals. These are children, mothers, fathers, babies, grandparents, escaping poverty, gangs, and authoritarian regimes. These are people coming to better their lives. These are the ones who fix your roof, repair your car, build your illegal basement add-on, slaughter your meat, pick your vegetables, prepare and serve your meals, take care of your loved ones at home, at the hospital, and watch our babies. That's why immigration law here in the United States is always, until Trump came along, it's always been vague. We need these people. Study after study shows foreign-born people in America are less likely to commit crimes than those born here. Study after study shows that immigrants, undocumented immigrants, pay more in taxes, pay more into our social safety net than they take out. This is nothing but scapegoating, what's going on right now. Blaming some of the most vulnerable people in the world for low wages and crumbling infrastructure here in America, when the real blame falls squarely on the billionaires who refuse to pay livable wages and their fair share of taxes. And the scapegoating gets easier when we're talking about people of color who don't speak English. So Garcia, driving through Tennessee, was pulled over in 2022. On March 12th of this year, Garcia, with zero criminal record, was driving through a Maryland parking lot with his son when ICE took him into custody, falsely claiming his temporary protected legal status had been revoked due to his known gang affiliations. ICE admitted 2 weeks later that Garcia had been arrested accidentally due to, quote, an administrative error, that his temporary protected legal status had not, in fact, been revoked. And ICE said there was zero evidence of any gang affiliations. But by then, it was too late for Garcia. It was on April 1st of this year when ICE admitted they made a mistake, but they arrested Garcia on March 12th. And within 3 days, he got shipped first to an ICE detention facility in Louisiana, then to an ICE facility in Texas, where he was placed on one of 3 planes carrying roughly 300 migrants heading for a terrorist detention center in El Salvador. El Salvador, a country that agreed to accept these 300 migrants in exchange for an annual fee of $6 million. $6 million. They're spending 20 grand per migrant a year to keep these people in El Salvador. Think of what you could do with $20,000 a year for these people and their families who we sent to El Salvador. 3 planes carrying roughly 300 migrants took off for El Salvador in March. Garcia was on one of them. His wife had no idea where he was until she saw this picture of him shackled in that dungeon in El Salvador. As the planes were being loaded, federal judge James E. Boasberg of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia heard an emergency appeal on behalf of these detainees being shipped to El Salvador, and Judge Boasberg ordered the Justice Department to instruct ICE to make sure the 3 planes never took off. Judge Boasberg added, if they were in the air, he said, tell ICE to turn the planes around. The Trump Justice Department disobeyed Judge Boasberg's order, later telling him, once the ICE planes were over international waters, the Justice Department lacked the legal authority to turn the planes around. In other words, the Justice Department was defying the judge's orders. Those were ICE planes flying over international waters. ICE planes take orders from ICE, from the U.S. government, and only the U.S. They only take orders from the U.S. government, no matter what country these planes are flying over or where they landed. They only take orders from the United States government. This was a flagrant and careless disregard for our courts. The president of El Salvador mocked Judge Boasberg's order by taking to Twitter with a video of the 3 planes unloading the migrants, with the president of El Salvador writing, whoopsie, too late. In April of this year, Judge Boasberg began proceedings to hold the Trump Justice Department in contempt of court for violating his order to turn the 3 planes around. Pam Bondi, our Attorney General, responded by filing an ethics complaint against Judge Boasberg, accusing him of trying to influence other judges, because when he spoke at a conference attended by Chief Justice John Roberts, Judge Boasberg warned the judges that the Trump Justice Department has a penchant for ignoring court orders. So the Trump Justice Department, always on offense, said this was an ethics violation. I'm going to return to the case of Garcia because there were some major developments on Monday. But it's important to note that so far this year, the Trump administration has defied 1/3 of major court orders issued by federal judges like Judge Boasberg. A recent Washington Post analysis found what the paper called widespread noncompliance with our legal system on the part of our current administration. Judge Boasberg, when he warned other judges about Trump defying the courts, Judge Boasberg, when he said that, wasn't pulling things out of thin air. The Washington Post poured over 337 lawsuits filed this year challenging the Trump White House's executive orders, and the Washington Post found that 1/3 of those orders, the White House, or in the case of Garcia, the Trump Justice Department, ignored the court orders. Judge Boasberg repeatedly warned our Justice Department that he found Trump officials in willful disregard of his order. He repeatedly threatened them with disciplinary action. He even talked about appointing his own independent counsel to prosecute members of the Trump Justice Department for contempt of court. Now, independent counsels are normally housed inside the Justice Department. But in order for a judge to investigate the Justice Department, he can appoint his own special counsel, a special counsel housed inside the judicial, not the executive branch. Judge Boasberg never followed through with that, never appointed a special counsel, but he did begin contempt of court proceedings against the Trump Justice Department. He began, but this month, an appeals court threw out Judge Boasberg's motion to begin contempt of court proceedings against the Trump Justice Department. The courts are not going to save us. One of the many reasons it is rare for a judge to bring contempt proceedings against our Justice Department is there's a norm. Before Trump, there was a norm called judicial deference to the executive branch. Before Trump, it's a norm that judges routinely would give the Department of Justice the benefit of the doubt, assuming it's an independent agency with limited resources trying to do its job the best way it can independently. And more importantly, judges would defer to the Justice Department on some issues because judges believed that the Justice Department is equally versed in the law as the judges are, sometimes even more so. So that's a norm until Trump became president. So there's another reason judges are slow to go ahead with contempt proceedings against the Justice Department. Subpoenas are delivered by the U.S. Marshals Service, which answers to Pam Bondi, our Attorney General. So a judge moving to place the Justice Department in contempt, Pam Bondi in contempt, well, that judge can't proceed without cooperation from the people he's trying to punish. That would be Pam Bondi. She controls the Marshal Service. It's why Senator Cory Booker introduced legislation this year that would remove the U.S. Marshal Service from the executive branch and place it inside the judicial branch. This is separations of power issues. It's for another show. I should point out, I don't know why our Department of Justice, which includes the FBI, is housed in the executive branch, answering to the president. Over the weekend, Donald Trump declared, "I'm the chief law enforcement officer in this country." He said it because the FBI and the Department of Justice answered to him. I don't know why we don't make the Justice Department and the FBI separate agencies answering equally to all three branches. But again, that's a separations of power issue that we can discuss on another show. Anyway, back to Abrego Garcia. In March of this year, he was wrongly shipped to that dungeon in El Salvador, despite having zero criminal record, despite being in this country legally, despite a judge giving him protected legal status, a work permit, and despite ICE admitting we made a mistake. He's innocent. I said he's innocent. On April 4th, U.S. District Judge Paula, damn it, I was going to look up the pronunciation of her name. It's Xinis. I think it's pronounced Zenas. Judge Paula Zenas. I apologize. Right before the show started, I made a note. Look up pronunciation. Anyway, on April 4th, U.S. District Judge Paula Zenas, Xinis, in Maryland, where Garcia, his wife, and children live, Judge Zenas ordered ICE to return Garcia to the United States. Erez Ruvani, is a lawyer who worked for the Justice Department, and he argued before Judge Zenas back in April that the Justice Department's official policy is that Abrego Garcia cannot be returned to the United States because he's a citizen of El Salvador. And since he's now being held inside an El Salvadoran prison, the United States lacked jurisdiction to bring him home. Judge Zenas was appalled, and Ruveni, the DOJ attorney, cracked. He admitted to her that Garcia shouldn't have been deported since ICE officially stated they made an administrative error. He then confided with the judge that his bosses over at the Justice Department failed to provide him with any evidence that Garcia is a gang leader, let alone a member of MS-13. Ruveni, the DOJ attorney, also confessed to Judge Zenas that his bosses at the Justice Department failed to supply him with any sound argument for why Garcia should not be returned to the United States and then freed. Well, that didn't go over well with our Attorney General, Pam Bondi. She suspended Ruveni the next day and later fired him for failing to make a full-throated argument on behalf of the United States government. And in firing Ruveni, our Attorney General, Pam Bondi, warned other Justice Department lawyers that the same fate awaits them should they behave like Ruveni. In other words, she was saying, when you go before a judge, you lie. You just make crap up. So Ruveni, he's the Department of Justice lawyer who got fired. He ended up becoming a whistleblower, claiming that it was Emil Bove, Trump's former criminal attorney serving in the number 3 position at the Justice Department, who told Justice Department lawyers that before those 3 ICE planes took off, carrying 300 migrants heading for El Salvador, he said the Justice Department lawyers would have to be prepared to tell the courts to, quote, F off. That's what Bove said, according to the whistleblower. But he used the actual F word, not F off. He said the F word. Ruveni, the fired justice attorney who became a whistleblower, said Emil Bove told Justice Department lawyers that moving forward, in order to carry out the wishes of our president, they may have to begin ignoring court orders. Ruveni's statements were handed over to the Senate Judiciary Committee during its hearings last month on Emil Bove's nomination for a lifetime appointment to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. He's left the Justice Department. Trump nominated him to be a judge. Judge Grassley, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, refused to hear testimony from the whistleblower, Ruveni. Chuck Grassley called Ruveni an 11th hour media smear and, quote, another coordinated political strike by Democrats. Well, the Senate confirmed the homunculus Emil Bove. He's now a judge. They confirmed him by a vote of 50 to 49. Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski were the only Republicans to vote against him. He's now a judge, despite a total of 3 whistleblowers from the Justice Department stepping forward willing to testify against him. One whistleblower had audio tape to prove Emil Bove committed perjury when he testified during his confirmation hearings about the deal New York City Mayor Eric Adams struck, where Adams agreed to cooperate with ICE in exchange for the Justice Department dropping its indictments charging Adams with accepting bribes from Turkey and violating campaign finance law. A third whistleblower was willing to testify that Emil Bove's agreement with Mayor Eric Adams was a blatant quid pro quo, but Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, refused to hear their testimony, all three. We do know the judge in the Adams case was furious with the Department of Justice dropping the case. He called it the judge. I think it's Judge Ho. Judge Ho called it a quid pro quo. And he was forced to dismiss the case against Adams with prejudice. The Justice Department said, we're not going forward. So the judge had to throw it out, but he threw the case out with prejudice, meaning the Justice Department cannot reopen their investigation should Mayor Adams, fail to cooperate with ICE, something Mayor Adams was never in any position to negotiate, since New York City is a sanctuary city. This year, ICE, after meeting with Mayor Adams, was planning to take up some space at New York's overcrowded Rikers Island in order to house migrants. But the New York City Council said, no, we're a sanctuary city. The Justice Department immediately sued Mayor Adams and the city for failing to cooperate with ICE. This is one of more than 30 lawsuits Trump is planning to file against major cities who are officially sanctuaries for the migrant community. So the idiots at Trump's Justice Department made a deal with Eric Adams. The case got thrown out with prejudice, which means Adams didn't have to follow through with the deal, and they can't prosecute him for taking bribes from the government of Turkey or campaign finance violations. So they're pissed off at Mayor Adams. They feel they were screwed and misled by our mayor, who used to be a cop and is the most corrupt mayor of New York City in my lifetime. So they're coming for Mayor Adams. Like Trump had to win in order to stay out of jail, Mayor Adams has to win in November. He's running for re-election, and he's not going to win. They're coming for him. Not just the Justice Department, the Manhattan DA. Ingrid Lewis-Martin, Mayor Adams' former chief advisor, was indicted on Thursday for corruption charges. Again, that indictment wasn't brought forth by the Justice Department. It was brought forth by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. No cooperation from Trump or Bove, who Alvin Bragg defeated last year when Bragg secured a criminal conviction after Trump was found guilty of falsifying business records in order to hide hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. She is the porn star Trump had condom-less sex with only weeks after Melania gave the president a son. So the Trump Justice Department is not going after Ingrid Lewis-Martin. That's Alvin Bragg. But the Trump Justice Department just launched an investigation into a former advisor to and fundraiser for Mayor Eric Adams. Her name is Winnie Greco, who has admitted to handing a reporter a bag of potato chips with cash inside. And as she handed the cash to the reporter, she asked for more favorable coverage of our mayor. Mayor Adams is running for a second term as a third-party candidate. He is currently polling in the single digits. It will be interesting to see how the Trump Justice Department comes after him next year for failing to assist ICE the way he promised he would. Well, back to Garcia. In April of this year, the judge in Maryland assigned to Garcia's immigration case, that would be Judge Zinis, X-I-N-I-S, she ordered ICE to remove Garcia from the El Salvadoran prison and return him to Maryland. The Trump Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, immediately appealed the judge's ruling. They took it to the Supreme Court, which ruled immediately that the Trump administration must facilitate Garcia's return. The Supreme Court could have been clearer by not using the word facilitate. They said, you must facilitate Garcia's return. They could have said, bring him home. But facilitate means bring him home. The definition of facilitate is to expedite, to accelerate, to make possible, to make easy, to smooth the progress. That's what the word facilitate means. But during a meeting inside the Oval Office, immediately after the Supreme Court's ruling, El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, with Trump sitting there, said he was not going to obey our Supreme Court's ruling. When asked by reporters where he gets off disobeying our courts, especially since we're paying him $6 million a year to house these migrants, Trump smirked while President Bukele of El Salvador responded, quote, "That question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States?" Attorney General Pam Bondi was in the Oval Office at the time and responded that, she told reporters, that El Salvador, not the Supreme Court, decides whether to return Garcia. And then El Salvador's President Bukele added, quote, "I'm not in the habit of releasing terrorists." So the Supreme Court said, bring Garcia home. And there's Pam Bondi immediately after in the Oval Office with the president of El Salvador, who's saying he's not going to return, he's not going to obey the Supreme Court, and Attorney General Pam Bondi lying, saying it's not for the Supreme Court to decide. Bondi lied again and told reporters in the Oval Office, she said Garcia was in the United States illegally. He isn't. And then she lied about the Supreme Court's decision. She just lied. She literally claimed the Supreme Court had just ruled that Garcia's return was entirely up to El Salvador. No, the court had just ordered the Department of Justice to facilitate Garcia's return. Facilitate, accelerate, make possible, make easy, smooth the progress. Also attending that big Oval Office meeting with the president of El Salvador was Nazi Stephen Miller, Trump's deputy chief of staff, who, you might remember, in the first Trump administration, devised the family separation policy. Stephen Miller figured if everybody's lying, I'm going to lie. And he claimed ICE never said it made an administrative error. Miller said ICE has always said they intended to deport Abrego Garcia. And Stephen Miller added, quote, "Garcia is the right person sent to the right place." So you tell me, is this evil? Is this the definition of evil? I think so. Stephen Miller then accused reporters, especially CNN, of siding with the terrorists because they're asking about Garcia. How is Garcia a terrorist? The lies, the slander, the defamation, when it comes to Garcia, there's just been a fire hose coming from the Trump White House. Attorney General Pam Bondi later that month cited discredited hearsay as evidence that Garcia was an MS-13 leader. She then lied again when she claimed an immigration judge had ruled he was a gang leader. Another lie. I just went over it. The immigration judge in 2019 gave Garcia temporary protected legal status specifically because he is not a gang member, let alone a leader. These are just liars, evil liars. And because it's hard to keep track, it all falls through the cracks for most people. Trump is an agent of chaos. He knows that he can lie because it's hard to keep track of all this. Our evil Director of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, in April, issued a press release filled with lies, calling Abrego Garcia a known member of MS-13 who was wanted in the United States on several criminal charges. Kristi Noem, evil, added, Garcia is a very dangerous person. No evidence to back this up. In July, offering zero evidence, the evil Kristi Noem said, quote, Garcia has a lifetime history of trafficking individuals. He's a horrible human being and a monster, and he should never be released free, unquote. Offered zero evidence, and then she made Scooby-Doo watch as she put a bullet through Scooby's 6-month-old son's eyes. I'm not making this up. This is actual video of Kristi Noem forcing Scooby-Doo to watch as she fires a bullet right into Scooby's 6-month-old son's eyes. Yesterday, Kristi Noem, the evil Kristi Noem, called Garcia, quote, a known MS-13 gang member, human trafficker, serial domestic abuser, and child predator. Well, I went over all of that to tell you, to prove to you that these are just lies. So I know what you're all wondering. Can Kristi Noem or Pam Bondi or Trump or Stephen Miller be sued by Garcia for defamation? It is my understanding that they cannot be sued for defamation. Officials inside the executive branch enjoy complete and absolute immunity from a defamation lawsuit if what they said falls under the role of official duties. Theoretically, you could sue them for defamation because their official duties are not to lie about Garcia. It's a hard case to try. In June, Pam Bondi, is that Pam Bondi? Hang on, is that Pam Bondi? Yes, that is an actual photograph of Pam Bondi. In June, Pam Bondi accused Garcia of being a child predator who trafficked pornographic images of minors. When asked for proof, she quickly changed the subject. The Attorney General says Garcia is trafficking in child pornography, and she's not prosecuting him? Where's the evidence? Secretary of State Marco Rubio also attended that Oval Office meeting with the fascistic leader of El Salvador. And Rubio, during the meeting, told reporters that the Supreme Court, which had just said, bring Garcia home, Rubio said the Supreme Court has no authority to tell the president how to conduct foreign policy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said deporting Garcia was up to the president, not the Supreme Court, because it's foreign policy. Rubio testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in May of this year and accused Garcia of being a human trafficker and a gang leader. Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen demanded Marco Rubio say that in a court of law. I played you the clip when that happened. Senator Van Hollen, who visited Garcia down in El Salvador, was referencing, when he said, say that in a court of law, Senator Van Hollen was referencing a sworn declaration under oath that Marco Rubio made in May before Judge Zenas in the Garcia case, where Rubio failed to accuse Garcia of any crimes, while at the same time argued for Garcia to remain in that El Salvadoran prison. Senator Van Hollen, during Rubio's testimony, remarked on how willing Rubio and the rest of the Trump administration is to slander and defame Garcia right up until they're under oath in a court of law. In May of this year, Garcia was still languishing in that El Salvadoran dungeon while the two judges, James Boasberg in D.C. and Paula Zenas in Maryland, were now empowered by the Supreme Court's order to bring Garcia home, and they began turning the screws on our Justice Department. They both demanded to know why Garcia wasn't back on U.S. soil and why the Justice Department was in open defiance of the Supreme Court order. So the Justice Department had a problem because the Supreme Court said, bring Garcia home. And Pam Bondi launched a plan so Trump could save face, orange face, turkey neck face. In late May, with Garcia still in El Salvador, this is the plan, Pam Bondi indicted Garcia here in America on charges of human smuggling. This was all so Trump could save face. They indicted Garcia on charges of human smuggling based on that 2022 traffic stop in Tennessee, where a patrol officer pulled Garcia over for driving 10 miles over the speed limit. That same cop ran a background check on Garcia with the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, who told him Garcia's not a human smuggler. They said, let him go. A dog came up empty when it sniffed Garcia, the passengers, and the car for drugs and guns. The only thing Garcia did wrong was drive 10 miles over the speed limit with an expired license. He was sent away, didn't get a ticket. The cop said, get your driver's license renewed. But from that one traffic stop, Garcia's only legitimate run-in with the law, Pam Bondi and her Justice Department have built an entire human trafficking case against Abrego Garcia. Why? Well, they want to give Trump a way to obey the Supreme Court order, bring Garcia home, but without admitting ICE and the Department of Homeland Security made a horrible mistake deporting him. By claiming Trump needed to bring Garcia back to the United States to face trial for human smuggling, Trump could now spin it as though Garcia belonged in that El Salvadoran dungeon right up until Trump discovered that Garcia is way, way worse than we had imagined, and we need to bring him back home to try him in the United States for human smuggling. It's garbage because Donald Trump is garbage. Pam Bondi, Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, and Marco Rubio are garbage. This is garbage. it is our Department of Justice refusing to back down, refusing to admit they made a mistake, refusing to admit that the chickens, the cowards from ICE, are constantly making mistakes, and that all ICE is doing is deporting innocent people. It does open up ICE for civil lawsuits, not just from Garcia, but from something like the 75% of the 300 men sent to that dungeon who had zero criminal records. There are eventually, if we survive, going to be a lot of lawsuits filed against ICE, which is why the Justice Department didn't want to bring Garcia home. But ICE returned Garcia to the United States on June 6 of this year. ICE handed him over to the Putnam County Jail in Cookeville, Tennessee. Tennessee is where that traffic stop in 2022 took place. It's where the Justice Department is basing its human smuggling trial on. ICE transferred Garcia into custody of the Justice Department, which brought Garcia before a federal judge, where Garcia's indictment was unsealed, much to the humiliation of our Justice Department, much to the humiliation of ICE and Pam Bondi. So a secret grand jury was convened in late May down in Tennessee. That secret grand jury examined all the evidence against Abrego Garcia, and based on all the evidence, every file based on that traffic stop, the grand jury indicted Garcia on only 2 counts: conspiracy to transport undocumented immigrants for financial gain, and unlawful transportation of undocumented immigrants for financial gain. That's it. Transporting undocumented immigrants. Not indicted for bringing them over the border for financial gain. Transporting undocumented immigrants from St. Louis to Maryland. Is that human smuggling? Kristi Noem, our Director of Homeland Security, repeatedly, to this day, in fact, yesterday, called Garcia a monster who traffics children. Pam Bondi, our Attorney General, that's not fair. It's a bad picture of her. A little better. Pam Bondi said Garcia traffics in child pornography. The grand jury in Tennessee didn't indict him on that? That seems a lot worse than giving undocumented immigrants a ride for financial gain. Marco Rubio called Garcia MS-13. He said Garcia was a leader of MS-13, a human trafficker, the worst of the worst. That is not artificial intelligence. That is real. I refuse to believe that is art. I don't know, maybe it's artificial intelligence. It doesn't look artificial to me. Stephen Miller, seen here at a Nuremberg rally with Adolf Hitler. That is not Photoshop. That is an act. I don't think it's Photoshop. Maybe it is. Who knows? It's hard to say. Stephen Miller called Garcia a terrorist. Donald Trump yesterday called Garcia an animal who beat his wife repeatedly, but all the grand jury in Tennessee could come back with is 2 indictments for taking money to transport undocumented immigrants. Not smuggle them into the country, just give them a ride for financial gain. U.S. Magistrate Judge Barbara Holmes is presiding over this sham trial down in Tennessee. She immediately accused the Justice Department of failing to provide sufficient evidence to back up their charges of human smuggling, especially since that's not even what he's been indicted for. She went on to say, based on evidence the Justice Department entered into the record, Garcia, being a human smuggler, quote, is a physical impossibility. That is what the presiding judge in this Garcia human smuggling case said. It is a physical impossibility based on the evidence you've entered into the record for him to be a human smuggler. She then ordered Garcia's release pending trial, saying there's absolutely no evidence that Garcia is a flight risk or a danger to the community. That is what the judge ruled. Garcia is not a flight risk, and he's not a danger to the community. Makes no sense to me. I mean, Trump, the president of El Salvador, Kristi Noem, Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, even Stephen Miller, all said Garcia's a terrorist, a child predator who traffics in child pornography, a serial wife beater, an animal, a human smuggler, and one of the top leaders of MS-13. Could they all be lying? Of course not. Which is why the Department of Justice immediately appealed Judge Holmes' ruling and went before U.S. District Judge Waverly Crenshaw, who immediately upheld the lower court ruling. Judge Crenshaw called the Department of Justice's claim that Garcia is a member of MS-13. Judge Crenshaw called that, quote, fanciful. In other words, a lie. Then in July, Judge Crenshaw ordered the Trump administration to refrain from commenting on the Abrego Garcia case for fear they are trying to taint Garcia's jury pool. That was in July. The judge concerned that Trump might want to taint a jury pool? Trump tainting a jury pool? Never. Never. Order his MAGA morons to threaten to kill a jury pool? Certainly. But taint? Speaking of taint, Kristi Noem was singled out by Judge Crenshaw, who specifically called out her comments as chief of the Department of Homeland Security about Garcia, and the judge ordered the Justice Department to inform Kristi Noem to cease and desist in her trash talking of Abrego Garcia. So now it's no longer defamation. You can't sue Kristi Noem for defamation. Now, however, Kristi Noem is disobeying a court order. This is contempt of court. Throughout August, despite the court order, the evil Kristi Noem defied Judge Crenshaw's order by repeatedly referring to Garcia as a monster who can't be allowed to walk our streets. Yesterday, the evil Kristi Noem said, quote, Garcia is an MS-13 gang member, human trafficker, serial domestic abuser, and child predator. That cannot sue her for defamation. She is disobeying Judge Crenshaw's court order. She is evil. It's why shooting the family puppy is a leading indicator of something seriously wrong with her. Seriously wrong. This is her, again, forcing Scooby-Doo to watch as she puts a bullet through the eyes of Scooby's 6-month-old son. She gets off on shooting puppies. Because Donald Trump is a merchant of chaos, it's hard to keep track of his crimes against humanity and democracy. It's part of the authoritarian playbook. Nobody can follow this except me and a couple of other people. But if you're just an ordinary human who works for a living and wants to go outside and it's summer, it's impossible to keep track of all these lies. Trump knows it. He knows it. So they say anything. It doesn't matter because even the prosecutors can't keep track of what to charge Trump and Noam with. I refuse to lose track of the narrative. I won't do it. I get up every morning and I track it. I keep track of it. So let's review, because he's a merchant of chaos. So let's review. Abrego Garcia did absolutely nothing wrong. Came to America when he was 16, got a work visa and protected legal status. He was in the country legally. He transported 8 or 9 non-English speaking day laborers from a construction site in St. Louis back to Maryland, got pulled over in Tennessee for driving 10 miles over the speed limit. The cop saw he had an expired driver's license. After checking with the FBI and Homeland Security, the cop then sent him on his way without a ticket. This was in 2022. Dogs searched Garcia, his passengers, the car for weapons, drugs, came up empty. FBI and Homeland Security told the Tennessee cop, Garcia is not a human smuggler. Let him go. Garcia, 0 criminal record. That's his only legitimate run-in with the law. Didn't get a ticket. Was driving with an expired driver's license. Was told to fix it. Came back to Maryland 3 years later. No run-ins with the law. ICE says they accidentally deported him. Trump refused to admit ICE made a mistake because they're accidentally deporting everybody. This opens up thousands of lawsuits. So they paint Garcia as a terrorist. They send him to that dungeon in El Salvador. The Supreme Court says, bring him home. To save face, Pam Bondi turns that Tennessee traffic stop into human smuggling. A grand jury comes up with a 2-count indictment that 2 judges call flimsy. Those 2 indictments are not going to hold up. You know the expression, a prosecutor can go before a grand jury and get them to indict a ham sandwich. That doesn't mean it's ever going to go to trial, because this stuff isn't going to hold up in court, and both presiding judges said so. And so, up until Monday, Garcia had been sitting since June 6th. They brought him back from the dungeon on June 6th. He had been sitting in a federal prison on these bogus human smuggling charges, while 2 federal judges wanted to release him. They said he wasn't a flight risk or a risk to the community. They wanted to release him. They couldn't. Why? because they were afraid ICE was going to grab Garcia and this time deport him to Uganda. I wish I were making this up. ICE said if the judges release Garcia to await trial, then ICE will snatch him off the street and deport him, not to El Salvador. They will obey that temporary protected legal status that prevents them from shipping Garcia back to El Salvador. Instead, they will ship him off to Uganda, which has agreed to take our migrants so long as they're not criminals. But he's facing criminal indictments, right? Well, what happens to Garcia once he's handed over to Uganda? Nobody knows. It's no longer our problem. Now, Uganda says they won't take criminals. And as I just said, Garcia was just indicted on charges of human smuggling. The Trump administration is saying he's a criminal, the worst of the worst. So why would they send him to Uganda? Why would Uganda agree to take the worst of the worst? Well, he won't get convicted if ICE can deport him before going to trial. So he won't be a criminal, even though he is one, if ICE can deport him before he gets an opportunity to clear his name, before a judge can say, this is not, we're throwing this out. It makes absolutely no sense. When you track this stuff, which I do, it makes zero sense, but that's the authoritarian playbook. There is no reason. There's just cruelty and injustice. First, Trump says Garcia is a danger to the community. He says we want Garcia locked up here in the United States now. We got to put him on trial now so we can crack the human smuggling ring that Pam Bondi and the rest of the Trump administration insist that Garcia's a major part of. And then it's, we're only interested in the cruelty, in the fascism. That's all it is. This is nihilism. This is why you can't argue with MAGA supporters without them turning to violence, because their answer to all this is violence. There's no reason there's this violence and cruelty. Well, obviously, the Justice Department and Trump realized, because the Supreme Court said bring Garcia home, that they maybe can't send him to Uganda, calling him a criminal who never had a trial. This violates due process. We still have a shredded due process. They want Garcia to just go away because he is a can of worms. Once he's free, the civil lawsuits for wrongful arrest begin with him and the thousands of migrants. So Trump realized sending him off to Uganda will look too vindictive, sadistic, fascistic, and dangerous, even for Republicans on the court, because it's too soon. It's too soon. We are only 6 months into Trump's presidency, and Bondi was treating Garcia, Kristi Noem was treating Garcia as though Trump had been back in office for more than a year. So Trump realized we need to slow this down. It's happening much faster we're getting away with stuff much faster than we imagined. Remember I told you on the last show that scholars who study authoritarian regimes are saying that in modern history, America is moving faster into an authoritarian regime than any country since World War II. Faster than the Latin American dictators, faster than Brazil or Hungary or Poland in the 21st century, faster than Russia, faster than Putin. It's happening very, very quickly. So Trump said, we still need to slow this down. We got to wait another 6 months before we start sending people like Garcia to Uganda with no due process. Let's just wait another 6 months when everyone in this country will be so worn down by the chaos and cruelty, they will either stop paying attention or just obey Trump for fear they will be next. That is an actual video. This is surveillance video. This is not, that is Donald Trump. Actual surveillance video made through artificial intelligence. It's amazing what you do a little Photoshop, run it through a program, and why do anything else? Why read? Why worry about the country when you can do that to Donald Trump? Okay. So I'm going to wrap it up. Is anybody still here? So last week, Bondi's Justice Department approached Garcia's attorneys with an offer. If Garcia is willing to plead guilty to charges of human smuggling, which are not going to hold up, if he pled guilty, he would serve whatever prison time was imposed by our courts, and then ICE would deport him to Costa Rica, not Uganda. Costa Rica, the Switzerland of Central America. Costa Rica offered to take Garcia, not as a prisoner, but as a legal resident with refugee status, where Garcia would be free to live out the rest of his life. But they said, if Garcia refuses to plead guilty, we're going to deport him to Uganda before he even has a trial. I am so proud to be an American. We truly are a beacon to the world, right? So what they were telling Garcia's lawyer is, have him plead out, just plead guilty. We know the judges are going to say this is a bogus case. And instead of Uganda, we send him to El Salvador. The worst of the worst. Child predator, child pornographer, serial abuser of his wife, leader of MS-13, a terrorist. And they're saying to his lawyer, just have him plead guilty to these two bogus human smuggling and charges. You and I know the judges will throw it out before it even goes to trial. And then he goes to El Salvador and we never see him again. On August 22nd, that would have been Friday, Garcia was released from the federal jail in Tennessee, where he was being held on charges of human smuggling. He's awaiting trial. And the judge released him, I think, because they received some kind of assurances that Garcia would not be deported, at worst detained in this country by ICE, with Judge Paula Zenas following closely. So on Monday, the 25th, Garcia returned to Maryland. He checked in with ICE, which then took him into custody. Immigration proceedings under Maryland Judge Paula Zenas have now resumed. She issued a ruling on Monday ordering 72 hours notice if ICE has any plans to deport Garcia to a third country. Now, that is a Supreme Court ruling. They said you cannot deport to a third country unless you give the migrant a heads up and an opportunity for due process. Judge Zenas added on Monday, quote, "The government is absolutely forbidden to remove Abrego Garcia from the continental United States," unquote. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign said Garcia isn't being sent to Uganda anytime soon since third country deportations take time. He said that, but once Garcia was taken into custody by ICE, he was sent to a detention center in Virginia, and Kristi Noem, who runs ICE because she's the head of Department of Homeland Security, she announced, "We plan to deport Garcia immediately to Uganda." Will the Trump Justice Department, they've disobeyed 1/3 of the court orders so far this year, according to the Washington Post. What do you think? Will they send him to Uganda? If you've listened to the entirety of this program, you would now agree with me when I said there are evil people in this world, but Abrego Garcia is not one of them. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Stay in the fight. Stay in the fight. The courts won't save us, but there are some judges. Judge Boasberg, Judge Zenas, Xinis, I'm sorry for butchering her name. There are some judges who are trying to save us. Make sure you're registered to vote. And the Democratic Party winning the midterms, either the Senate or the House of Representatives, are the jaws of life. I mean, we've crashed. We're bleeding out. We need to be rescued. And all we've got is the horrible Democratic Party to save us. This country is bleeding out. Make sure, as much as you hate Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, make sure one of them, make sure Hakeem Jeffries is either the Speaker or Senate, or Chuck Schumer is Senate Majority Leader after the 2026 midterms. This country is bleeding out, and people who study authoritarian regimes say they've never seen, after World War II, they have never seen a country devolve this quickly into an authoritarian regime. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. I read all your comments, so please leave one. If I made any mistakes, please correct me. Please like this episode. That way I remain in your feed. Hit the notification bell so you'll always know when there's a new episode. Subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to my newsletter. And please share this. I don't have anybody helping me. I have Sam Cedar and Robert Smigel. The only people other than Smigel and Cedar are you, my listeners. I'm entirely dependent on my listeners to fight the throttle. They throttle back shows like this. So help me fight the throttle by sharing this with your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. Share it with family and loved ones. I will try to do a show either tomorrow or the next day. Thank you.